Life is full of contradictions. The child who sees the aeroplane flying above wants to be its pilot one day. The pilot who looks below at the countryside wants to be at its home. That's what life is all about. Everyone wants to be a billionaire, but no one wants to work hard. Everyone wants to go to heaven, but no one wants to die. That's our life. And that's why St. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, chapter 7, verse 19 says, I do not do the good that I wish to do, but I always do the evil that I intend not to do. Yes, my dear friends, as we reflect on the readings of the 26th Sunday of Ordinary Time, a similar gospel passage is presented before us. As we listen to the gospel passage, the parable of the two sons present before us the contradictory nature of these two sons. The first son, though initially says a no to the father's request of going to the vineyard, later on he changes his heart and obeys his father's will. Whereas the second son, though initially he says yes to the father's request, he fails to keep up his promise. And Jesus says that it is better to be like first son than the second son. For the action of the first son reminds us the Proverbs, it is better to be late than never, or actions speak louder than words. And the action of the second son reminds us the proverb, don't promise that you can't deliver. And Jesus uses this parable in order to bring the contrast between the Pharisees and the tax collectors. The Pharisees were always self-righteous, whereas the tax collectors, though they were sinful, yet they had a heart that was willing to change, and it was a change for better, and it was change for always something good. And that's what the first reading of today, which is taken from the book of prophet Ezekiel, tells us. The life of the sinners when they are converted is pleasing in the sight of God, and they will have a new life altogether. In the life of apostles Peter and Paul, the best example in this regard. For if you look at their life was similar to the first son of the parable. Peter, though once denied Jesus, yet he had a change of heart, so much so that he became the rock or the pillar of the church and died a martyr's death. Similarly, St. Paul, who once persecuted Christians, the moment he encountered the risen Christ, had a change of heart and became one of the greatest pillars of the church. What about us? How often my life resembles that of the second son? How often I break the promise that I make? Am I a trustworthy person? These are the questions I need to answer myself. If you look around in our society or into our own life, what do we see? We see a life full of contradictions. And to name a few of these contradictions one by one, everyone is in a hurry, but no one reaches on time. We need to look at both the sides while crossing even in one way. You need to be studied at least till grade 8 in order to be a peon, but to run a country don't need any educational qualification. Kabaddi is the true Indian sport where everyone comes together and pulls that person who wants to achieve something. The shoes that we wear are sold in an air-conditioned room, whereas the vegetables that we eat are sold in footpath. The poor walk miles to get their food, whereas the rich walk miles to digest their food. There is more fruit in rich man's shampoo than a poor man's plate. A milk vendor has to come to our doorstep, whereas we walk miles and miles to get the liquor. To the milk vendor we ask, "Did you add water?" Whereas when we drink alcohol, we add water ourselves. Parents want their children to stand out in the crowd, but expect them to do as the crowd wants. Parents are ready to spend more on their daughter's wedding than her education. It's dangerous to speak to strangers, but it's perfectly okay to marry a one. For a daughter-in-law, her parents are precious gems, but her in-laws are worthless germs. And for a mother-in-law, her daughter is a precious gold, whereas her daughter-in-law is worthless maid. And finally, everyone wants to change the world, but no one wants to help the mom to do the dishes. So, how can we change ourselves? What is the message that the gospel of today wants to tell us? Firstly, don't give the promise that you can't keep. For whenever we promise someone and we don't act according to that promise, we break their trust. And trust, like a mirror, once broken, it cannot be repaired. Secondly, whenever we say yes, the other person expects a lot from us. And when we don't act according to their expectation, they will be the most disappointed persons. So it is better to say a straight no than a yes or a promise that we can't keep. And finally, let our deeds speak more than our words. Let us remember, it is better to be a sinner who repents than a hypocrite who pretends.
Perfect.